us. And joining us from Westminster, we have the Shadow Secretary of State for Housing and Living Up, Lisa Nandy. Good morning to you, Lisa Nandy. Thanks for joining us this morning. Lots to talk to you about. I'm sure you've seen the headlines. Boris Johnson set to announce the benefit claimants will be able to buy homes a little bit later on. We'll come to that in just a moment. I wonder if you could also comment as well for our viewers. One of the things they'll be waking up to is these further increases in fuel costs at the petrol pumps. It seems it's going to be costing around £100 to fill up a family car from now on. It's a sort of an ongoing struggle that they are facing. The cost of living squeeze is horrendous at the moment, but these fuel prices are a real concern. A third of people need their car for work. It's worse in rural areas. I wonder what Labour are suggesting the government should do to try and reduce the cost of petrol.
Well, we're really concerned about it as well. I think every family in the country is touched by this now, businesses as well, public services. And you're right that it's worse in some parts of the country. Back home, people are now really struggling with the fact that it costs over £100 to fill up a family car, and that is something that a lot of people can't afford. It's one of the reasons why we've been pushing for an emergency budget to tackle the cost of living crisis. We've got to get money back into people's pockets. One of the ways that we've been pushing the government to do that is the windfall tax on the oil and gas producers to knock money off people's energy bills, which the government has now accepted is the right thing to do. We think the government should also spike the rise in national insurance contributions. We're the only major economy that is putting up taxes on working people in the middle of a pandemic, post-pandemic and in the middle of an inflation crisis. That just can't be the right thing to do.
And what about specifically with fuel prices? Because that's energy prices, that's, of course, cost of living with the national insurance. The government reduced fuel duty by 5p, which we haven't necessarily seen passed on at all stations around the country. Is there anything specific you would like to see them do with fuel?
Well, I mean, the point is to get money back into people's pockets whichever way that you can. I was just listening to the debate between Quentin and Miata about how best you can do that. And I think Miata's right. There are tools at the government's disposal, but you've got to look at this in the round. You know, housing costs, energy costs, fuel costs, costs of rail and bus services, all of these things are now hitting families very hard. And the key is to find ways to get money back into people's pockets so people can actually keep their heads above water over the next few weeks and months.
Well, of course, while they're trying and worrying about filling up their car, one of the alternatives is to take the tube or trains, isn't it? And there's concern there, because we now know there are these 3-day planned massive disruption, potentially the worst disruption for 30 years, coming in just a couple of weeks' time. You have always been supported when you stood for leader by the RMT, the union involved, and other unions. And it has been quite noticeable that Labour hasn't spoken out either for or against this. And what is Labour's position on these strikes? Is it right to be doing this to potentially damage the economy at a time when it least needs it and potentially make life very difficult for people that want to just get on with work?
Well, look, we want to avoid the strikes, and we're on the public side on this. We're also on the rail workers' side. I was speaking to some of my rail workers on Monday, just before I got on the train to come down to London. They're dealing with the same pressures that we've just been talking about that everybody else is. The cost of food, the cost of soaring inflation rates, taxes going up, and they're really struggling to make ends meet. They're the people that we went out and applauded during the pandemic because they kept our services going, and they've seen their pay in real terms attacked again and again over the last decade.
We also applauded nurses and doctors, didn't we? And they are seen as essential workers, and generally, you know, doctors don't strike. So we're having a debate on it in a few minutes' time, actually, whether in a situation like this, does Labour think it's right for them to take this action?
We think it's wrong for the government to try to penalise rail workers for the problems that they've created on our railways. They need to get round the table and avoid this strike by talking to the trade unions who represent the workforce, making sure that we properly support our workforce.
And if they can't come to a conclusion that is mutually acceptable on both sides, you will be supporting those rail workers going on strike?
Look, I've stood with our rail workers, just like I stood with junior doctors when they protested against the treatment that was being meted out to them by the government, and our nurses as well. The way that you create good public services and a good service for the public is not to attack the people who run those services, who work day in, day out in order to try and keep them going. The way that you do it is to support them, to come to an agreement with them. They're reasonable people. They want to keep their jobs and they want to see good rail services.
That agreement means compromise on both sides, and they want to see modernisation. They won't. But let's hope within the next 2 weeks something can be done so that the country doesn't have to go through that. A lot of comment has been made about Keir Starmer yesterday not necessarily seizing the moment when there's a government that's just come so close to Prime Minister's come so close to losing a no-confidence vote. Of course, they argue that they won it comfortably, but, you know, a very big vote against him. And, in fact, Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, came out and said, look, what they need to do is come up with a clear policy that's defined and different from the government, not keep harping on about what the government does wrong. Do you welcome getting advice from someone like Lord Mandelson? Because, of course, he was part of the party when it won 3 elections.
Well, I've never been leader of the opposition, but I do know that when you are, you get advice from a lot of people and it's often conflicting. And in the end, you have to make your own decisions. And I think Keir is right to be talking about the things that are keeping people awake in this country day in, day out.
Talking about them, but also offering them a clear alternative.
Sure.
We haven't heard that yet, have we? And that's certainly what people are telling us. Well, they haven't heard it yet.
3 months ago, we were pushing the government to bring in a windfall tax on the oil and gas producers in order to cut energy bills for families and businesses up and down this country. We were told it was nonsense. We were told it was completely unachievable. And now we're told that it's perfectly possible and reasonable, and the government is planning to do it. We're saying to the government, spike the rise in national insurance contributions, don't put up taxes on working people, bring forward an emergency budget. And today the Prime Minister is about to go and make a speech where he's going to say in the next few weeks the government is going to come up with some undefined measures to help people with the cost of living crisis. That sounds awfully like the measures that we've been calling for. So I don't accept that we haven't put forward constructive alternatives. And even today, when people are struggling with crippling housing costs in many parts of the country, we are putting forward proposals to the government to how you deal with that without making the housing crisis work, cracking down on unfair leasehold charges that many people in this country are struggling with, and making sure that we cap those costs for people so that they don't have to deal with that as well.
OK, Lisa Nandy, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us this morning.